My stepdaughter told me I had never really been part of this family. She said it at the kitchen table 5 days after we buried her father, while her brother stood in the doorway holding one of my cardboard moving boxes. Not my clothes, not my dishes. The actual box I had carried in 7 years before, the one I had broken down flat and kept in the attic because I am not a person who throws away a good box. He had gone up there before the coffee was made. For 11 months, they believed that was the end of me. Here is what none of them saw coming. My name is Roberta Ainsworth. I am 63 years old. For 32 years, I worked as a forensic accountant doing financial due diligence for corporate mergers in Cincinnati. You want to know what that job actually is? It is a stack of documents, a yellow legal pad, and the absolute refusal to stop reading until you find the thing somebody hoped you would not find. Companies hide liabilities in footnotes. They bury bad news in subbracks. They attach schedules that reference other schedules and hope nobody pulls the whole chain. My job was to pull it. My job was to read everything. I trained 11 analysts over the years and told every one of them the same thing on their first morning. The lie is always in the footnotes. Read what the document does not say. That is where the real answer lives. I met Franklin Brody in the spring of 2015 at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital where his late wife had been treated. He was 65, a big man with a concrete contractor's hands and a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the room worth talking to. His company, Brody Contracting, had been pouring foundations in Hamilton County for 30 years. His wife, Marlise, had died of cancer in 2013, and you could still see it on him 2 years later, the particular weight of a man who has sat in too many hospital waiting rooms and walked out alone every time. We married in April of 2016 at the courthouse downtown. My oldest friend Lucille stood up for us and cried through the whole thing, even though she claims she did not. We had 9 years. Franklin died of a stroke on a Tuesday morning in January, alone in the garage. He was 71. His children sat in the first pew at the funeral. I sat 3 rows back beside an old friend of Franklin's named Boyd, who kept clearing his throat the way men do when they are trying not to cry in public. Nobody moved down to make room for me. I noticed that. I filed it away. 5 days later, my stepson called and said the family needed to meet at the house. Just family, he said, and the pause before the word told me everything. His name is Dustin. He is 42 and has been running Brody Contracting since Franklin stepped back in 2020. He is capable and he knows it, and sometimes those two things become a problem. When Marlise was sick, Dustin kept the company running. He drove her to chemo. He managed the crews and the payroll and the bids without being asked once. He had assumed for years that the company was already his, because in every way that required work, it was. I understood that. I understood it completely. It did not make what came next easier. My stepdaughter is Kelsey, 38. When Marlise died, Kelsey went through the house within the month and took everything that had been her mother's. The dishes, the linens, the framed watercolor of Lake Erie that had hung in the hall since Kelsey was a girl. She was within her rights. Franklin told me so quietly afterward, said she needed those things to feel close to her mother, and I unpacked what I had brought and made the house into something we could both live in, and I did not once say that the watercolor had been in a better spot. 3 years later, Franklin bought a new kitchen table because the old one had a crack through the leaf. Kelsey never forgave me for it, though neither of us had asked her permission. In her accounting, that table was evidence of something. At the meeting, Dustin had set my cardboard box on the table before anyone sat down, flat and folded, like a statement. Franklin's sister, Adele, who is 69 and has been telling the same story about her divorce for 25 years, sat at the head of the table in Franklin's chair and folded her hands. She said the word fair 3 separate times in the first 4 minutes, which is how you know a person has already decided what fair means before they arrived. Dustin explained that Franklin's will was dated 2010. Left the house and the business to him and Kelsey in equal shares. He said there was a prenuptial agreement that was clear. Then he said, "And I am not going to soften it. You came with a box, Roberta. Take the box and go." Kelsey had looked at the window the whole time he was speaking. Then she turned to me and said, "You were never really part of this family. We made room for you. That is not the same thing." She was not wrong that she had made room. She had. The room was small, and the door faced away from everything, but she had made it. Adele said, "I think that's fair," and clasped her hands tighter. I said, "All right," 2 words. I took my coat from the hook by the door and walked out. Franklin's barn coat was hanging next to mine, and I left it where it was. Their lawyer, a man named Harmon Graves of Graves and Whitlock on 4th Street, called me the following Monday. He had handled Franklin's estate work for 15 years. He was 55 and smooth in the way men get after winning the same argument in the same conference room for 2 decades. He told me the prenuptial agreement waived my claims. He told me the will was unambiguous. He told me there was a 12-month window for certain spousal challenges, and that in his professional opinion, I would be spending money chasing a fight I would not win. 12 months, he said. He let the number sit there like a fence. I thanked him and hung up, and I did not call a lawyer, not that week, not for months. I want to be honest about why. I told myself it was dignity. I told myself I was not going to spend Franklin's money fighting his children in court and prove everything they already thought about me. The truth is simpler and less flattering. I had just buried my husband and been told in his own kitchen that I had never truly belonged there. And when a room full of people nod along to that sentence, you do not immediately think about your legal options. You think about whether any of the 9 years were real. They were. I knew that. But knowing it and feeling it are not the same thing, and for a while I could only manage one of them. There was a green metal fishing tackle box in the garage, 2-tiered, the kind Franklin's father had owned before him. Franklin fished maybe once a year, but he kept that box organized the way some men keep their tools. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. I had seen it 100 times on the shelf above the workbench. When I cleared my things from the garage in February, I left it. It had never been mine, or so I told myself. In August, I had lunch with Lucille at the diner on Erie Avenue where we had eaten since 1994. Lucille is 66. She worked beside me at Hammond Daily for 20 years, and she is the only person in my life who tells me the truth even when I have specifically asked her not to. She listened to me talk for 30 minutes. Then she put her fork down and said, "Roberta, have you looked at the will?" I said I knew what it said. She said, "Have you read it yourself, the actual document?" I had not. I had taken Harmon Graves' summary as given, the way you do when you are grieving, and a man in a good suit tells you what something means. Lucille looked at me the way you look at someone who has forgotten what they are good at. "You read footnotes for a living," she said. "Go read the footnotes." She paid for lunch, and on the way out, she said one more thing, and it sat in me like a stone for 3 months. "They are counting on you being too polite to look." In November, I drove to the Hamilton County Probate Court on Sycamore Street. When a will is probated in Ohio, it becomes a public record. Any person can walk up to the clerk's counter and ask for the file. I had known that for 30 years and had never once thought to apply it to my own life. I gave them Franklin's name. The clerk brought out a folder an inch thick. I carried it to the long table by the window, put on my reading glasses, and opened it at page 1. The petition for probate is the first document in any estate file. It is what the lawyer files to open the estate. Harmon Graves had signed it in February. Paragraph 2 stated that Franklin James Brody had died testate, leaving a last will and testament, dated September 22, 2010. Paragraph 4 stated that the decedent was survived by his spouse, Roberta Lynn Ainsworth Brody, whom the decedent had married on April 9, 2016. I sat back in that chair. September 2010, April 2016, 5.5 years apart. The will came first. I wrote both dates on my legal pad and drew a line between them, the way I used to when I found 2 numbers in the same document that were not supposed to be that far apart. Then I asked the clerk for a copy of the will itself. The will was 8 pages. The opening paragraph read, "I, Franklin James Brody of Anderson Township, Hamilton County, Ohio, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I am not presently married. I have 2 children of my prior marriage, Dustin Allen Brody and Kelsey Ann Brody. Not presently married." I read that sentence 4 times. Then I drove 3 blocks to the law library on Main Street and found the Ohio Revised Code, Title 21, Section 2107-34. If a testator marries after making a will and the will makes no provision for the spouse, the surviving spouse shall receive the same share of the estate as if the testator had died intestate, unless it appears from the will that the will was made in contemplation of marriage to such spouse. I wrote it out longhand. Then I found the intestate succession statute. Section 2105.06. If the deceased left children who are not also children of the surviving spouse receives 1/2 of the net estate. 1/2. I checked the pocket supplement in the back of the volume. Then I found the same statutes on my phone and read them again to make sure the library copy was current. 3 times. Same answer every time. Franklin's will opened by stating he had no wife. It was true in September of 2010. He was a widower. He had not yet driven to a hospital fundraiser and met the woman he would spend the rest of his life with. That sentence was not a lie, and it was not written to hurt me. It was just a sentence that stopped being the whole truth after April 9th, 2016. And Harmon Graves had filed it, stamped it Exhibit A, built 11 months of confident letters and phone calls on a document whose first paragraph said that when it was written, Franklin Brody had no wife at all. I drove home the long way, past the house on Thornberry Lane. The porch light was on. The azaleas Franklin had planted 2 springs ago were bare for winter, but the beds were clean. The fact that the yard looked fine made something go very quiet in me. Then I thought about the tackle box. I called Dustin the next morning and said I needed to collect a few remaining items from the garage. He met me there with Kelsey, the same as February. I kept it short. I took a coffee mug that had been my mother's, and I took the green tackle box from the shelf. Kelsey looked at it. "That was Dad's," she said. "I know," I said. "I'll let you know if there's anything in there that belongs to you." She started to say something. I was already at my car. I did not open the box that night. I set it on my kitchen counter and walked past it for 6 weeks, the way you walk past something you are not quite ready to know. Then one Sunday in January, when the radiator was running and I wanted something to do with my hands, I unlatched it. Top tray, fishing line, 2 lures, a pocket knife, a stub of pencil. Bottom tray, a rubber-banded stack of birthday cards in the kids' handwriting, a photograph of Marlisi from what looked like the early 90s, and a white business envelope. Graves and Whitlock, attorneys at law, 4th Street, Cincinnati. Postmarked March 14, 2018. Inside was a 2-page letter on firm stationery addressed to Franklin. It read, "Per our conversation of March 8th, we understand you wish to amend your last will and testament to include your wife, Roberta Ainsworth Brody, as a primary beneficiary, receiving a 1/2 share of the residuary estate. We have prepared the proposed amendment language for your review. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule execution." Clipped to the corner, a yellow sticky note in handwriting I did not recognize. "Franklin, let's hold off until after tax season. Call me in May. H.G. Harmon Graves." I sat on the kitchen floor with that envelope for a long time. May had come in 2018. Then summer. Then 3 more years. Franklin had walked into his lawyer's office, sat down, and told Harmon Graves that he wanted to give his wife half of everything. And Graves had written him a note that said, "Wait until May." And Franklin did what Franklin always did with the hard conversation. He tucked the letter away somewhere safe and told himself there was still time. He meant to bring it up again. He was the kind of man who meant to do a lot of things. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name is Portia Mead. She is 49, a sole practitioner on Madison Road who handles nothing but probate work. She is not a person who softens things, and I mean that as a compliment. I put everything on her desk. The probate petition with the 2 dates, the will itself, the envelope from the tackle box. She read quietly for 10 minutes, then she squared the pages. "The prenuptial agreement," she said. "Bring me your original." I had it in my bag. I keep every document I have signed since 1989 in a fireproof box, which Franklin thought was the funniest habit a person could have. Portia read 4 pages without speaking. Then, Section 6 references a Schedule B of financial disclosures. Where is it? There was no Schedule B. There had never been a Schedule B. I had been handed that agreement in a conference room in 2015, signed before a notary, and the schedule it referenced had existed nowhere in any copy of the document. Not mine. Not, as Portia later confirmed when she requested Graves' file copy, his. Ohio, Revised Code Section 3103-07. A premarital agreement is unenforceable without fair and reasonable financial disclosure. No schedule, no written waiver of disclosure, no acknowledgement of any kind. "How long has the estate been open?" she said. 11 months. "Has it distributed?" "Not yet." Dustin requested a formal court hearing. She nodded once, the way you nod when someone puts a complete hand on the table. "Then we file today." Dustin had asked for the hearing because he wanted the distribution stamped on record. He had told people, according to Lucille, that he wanted it done properly so I could never come back on them. So Graves filed a first and final account and a petition for adjudication, and because I was the surviving spouse, they sent me a copy of the account, and with it, a form. Joinder, waiver of notice, and consent to proposed distribution. I sat at my kitchen table with that form and my reading glasses, and I did what I have done since 1991. I read every word, both pages, twice. Then I read what was not there. No release of claims, no mention of Ohio Revised Code Title 21, no waiver of any right arising under the Pretermitted Spouse Statute. No sentence saying in full satisfaction of all spousal rights. The form had been written for an adult child signing off on a parent's estate. Someone had typed my name on it without changing a word. I signed it. In blue ink, I meant every word of it. I had no objection to the accounting. I consented to the will doing exactly what the will said. I just also happened to know what the will could not do. Portia mailed the signed form back that same afternoon. She also filed a claim of surviving spouse under Ohio Revised Code, Section 210734, served on Graves and Whitlock by certified mail. The green card came back signed by his paralegal on a Thursday. The hearing was on a Monday morning in April at Hamilton County Probate Court. Dustin and Kelsey arrived with Adele, who wore her church clothes and sat with her purse on her lap. I got there 15 minutes early with Portia and the green tackle box, which I used as my document case because it holds 2 manila folders flat and because I had decided it should be in that room. Dustin saw it in the hallway. He looked at it a half-second longer than made sense. Then he said quietly the same thing he had said 14 months ago at the kitchen table. "You came with a box, Roberta. You are not leaving with the house." I said, "Dustin, your lawyer wrote the letter that's inside this box. His initials are on the sticky note. You may want to know that before you go through that door." He looked at me for a long moment. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. Judge Annette Puckett has sat in Hamilton County Probate for 17 years. She reads files the way I used to read balance sheets, fast and quiet, nothing on her face until she finds the number that does not match. Harmon Graves made his presentation smoothly. Gross estate, $2.3 million. Real property, business interest, liquid assets. Debts paid, taxes filed. Distribution to Dustin and Kelsey per the will's terms. My signed joinder form, Exhibit D. He held it up a half-second longer than he needed to. "The surviving spouse has consented to distribution, Your Honor. Executed 3 weeks ago." Kelsey turned and nodded at Dustin. Adele exhaled. Judge Puckett took off her reading glasses and let them rest on the bench. "Mr. Graves." Paragraph 2 of your probate petition states the will was dated September 22, 2010. She did not look up from the file. Paragraph 4 states the decedent married Mrs. Brody on April 9, 2016. That's correct, Your Honor. So he married after he made it. Yes, but the surviving spouse has consented to the distribution as. Read me the opening paragraph of the will. A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. The same pause I had heard over the phone 11 months before, when I asked Graves whether Franklin had ever come in to talk about updating things. The pause of a man checking a document in his head before he answers. Graves picked up his own exhibit, the will he had drafted, filed, and marked Exhibit A his own work. I, Franklin James Brody of Anderson Township, Hamilton County, Ohio, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I am not presently. He stopped. He had gotten 4 words past Franklin's name. The window unit in the corner ran. Somebody's chair creaked. Kelsey said, "What?" and her husband put a hand on her arm without knowing why. Harmon Graves set the will down on the table. He sat down. He did not pick it back up. Judge Puckett said, "Mrs. Meade, I assume we're here about Section 210734. Portia stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Graves came back up and argued the prenup. He argued that my consent form waived all claims. He argued the 12-month window in equity and the clear intent of the parties, and his voice went up at the end in a way it had not all morning. He talked for 7 minutes. Kelsey nodded at everything he said. Dustin sat very still. Portia used 40 seconds. Section 210734 is not an election. There is no deadline. The pretermitted spouse share vested by operation of law on the date of the marriage. April 9, 2016. Counsel's consent form waives notice and raises no accounting objection. It contains no release and makes no mention of Title 21. Mrs. Brody meant every word she signed. 1 second of silence. As for the prenuptial agreement, the financial disclosure schedule, referenced in Section 6, does not exist. Not in Mrs. Brody's original, and not in the copy counsel produced from his own file. Ohio Revised Code, Section 3103-07. She sat down. I stood up once. I did not raise my voice, because I have never in my life gotten what I was owed by raising my voice. Mr. Graves, you drafted the letter asking my husband to wait. I have the original in this box, with your initials on it. I only read what you sent. I sat back down. Judge Puckett ruled from the bench. She held that Section 210734 applied on the face of the record. She noted that the exception requires contemplation of marriage to appear from the will itself, and that the opening paragraph of this will stated the precise opposite. She held that my joinder form waived nothing beyond notice and accounting objections and contained no release of any statutory right. She held that the premarital agreement failed for want of the financial disclosure required under Section 3103.07. Under Section 2105.06, where a decedent leaves children who are not children of the surviving spouse takes 1/2 of the net estate. 1/2 of $2.3 million is $1.15 million. I asked for the house as part of my share because I had planted the azaleas and I knew which cabinet stuck, and I was not inclined to negotiate on it. The judge awarded it. Dustin hit the table with his palm and said his father would never have wanted this. The bailiff took 1 step forward. Judge Puckett said his name twice in a flat voice. Kelsey did not shout. She turned around in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. She said, very quietly, "He told me once in the car that he needed to get his paperwork fixed. I thought he was just talking." She turned back around and did not look at me again. Adele stared at the flag in the corner and did not move. And Judge Puckett, closing the file, said one final thing. "Mr. Graves, before the fee petition is scheduled, you may want to consider retaining separate counsel for that proceeding. Here is what happened afterward in numbers, because numbers do not fade the way feelings do. The court entered a decree awarding me 1/2 of the net estate plus the house at its appraised value, applied against my share. The net cash after the house offset came to $788,000. Graves' fee petition was cut nearly in half by the court. Dustin retained a Pittsburgh firm and filed a grievance with the Ohio Board of Professional Conduct, citing the 2018 letter and the failure to execute an amendment his own client had requested. That proceeding is, as of this spring, still ongoing. Kelsey kept her mother's dishes and the watercolor of Lake Erie and the jewelry and her house in blue ash. She is a good mother to her children. I have heard that from people I trust, and I believe them. I moved back to the house on Thornberry Lane in May. The first thing I did was not the roof, and it was not the gutters. I went under the kitchen sink with a wrench and a $40 repair kit from the hardware store, and I fixed the dripping faucet that Franklin had put on his list for 4 years running. It took me 35 minutes. It does not drip anymore. The tackle box sits on the same shelf in the garage where it always sat. I kept the birthday cards and the photograph of Marley's and the Swiss Army knife. I kept the envelope with HG's initials on the yellow square, because there are some documents you do not throw away. The cardboard box is back in the attic, broken down flat, in the same spot it occupied for 7 years. Dustin was right about one thing. I came into that house with one cardboard box. I also came in with 32 years of reading very carefully, a legal pad, and the patient certainty that if something is written down somewhere, it is worth the time to find it. Nobody handed me that estate. I did not outsmart anyone. I walked into a public building and asked for a file. Then I sat down at the table by the window, and I started at page 1. The lie is always in the footnotes. I spent 30 years finding them. That is the job. It always was, and I am still very good at it.